Okay, this is part one of our demonstration on drawing objects with shading and value. So the most important thing to kind of recognize when you start looking at an object and you're going to draw with shading and value, a range of value, is to notice how the light impacts the image. When the light is closer, the highlight on the ball is much stronger, and highlight's one of the vocabulary words we reviewed in class, so the highlight is much stronger. The middle value here may be about the same, but lighter, and then the shadow area may be a little darker on the object. When the light is farther away, the highlight area is a little softer, the middle value here is larger, and the shadow on the object a little darker. If you notice the cast shadow, which is this shadow here, the cast shadow is going to change based on the angle of the light. If the light is low, the angle is long, the cast shadow is long. If the light is high, the cast shadow is very small. So if you're drawing from real life, or if you're making things up or drawing from your imagination, you have to kind of anticipate where you want the light to come from when you start. So I'm going to adjust the ball slightly and move it over a little before we get started, so you can see a little more of the cast shadow, and I'm going to adjust the light. So the cast shadow is a little longer, and there we go. So to start out, we're just going to make a nice sketch. We're going to make a nice circular shape because the sphere or the ball is basically a circle. And normally I would be rotating my paper, but since I have this all set up, I'm going to just sketch without rotating my paper. Remember to use an arc, and you can keep turning your paper and you should get a nice round circle. So there we go. Now the second piece that I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a few landmarks. I see a couple of things. This line goes through the back of the ball right here, and I think that hits a little bit farther up, like maybe halfway. But I'm going to first mark the middle of the ball at the bottom. If you notice cast shadows, most cast shadows start at about the center of the object, maybe a little bit farther. So here's the center point, and this is the cast shadow shooting out. So if here's my center point on my sketch, the cast shadow is going to come out a little bit farther there, and it scoops down and it goes over to the left. Oh, I'm going to adjust a little bit more so you can see that. So there's the ball, here's the center point, and I'm going to zoom out slightly. So cast shadow scoops over to the left like this, and then if I look at the object from the center point here, and if I go up along the object, I can see the midpoint line shooting out, not as far up as I would expect. It's just a little bit lower. It's not quite halfway. So here we go. Shoot that out this way and straight across from the ball here. And then from this line, I'm looking at how far up the cast shadow falls on the ball. Typically, if your ball is laying on a flat surface, the cast shadow will not come up this high on the object. But because the paper behind the ball is raised, it changes the shadow. So the shadow is up much higher in this sketch than it would normally be if it were laying on a flat surface. So this comes down, and then this bumps out. The cast shadow fades quite a bit as it comes out, so I'm going to kind of try and show those two rings. This is a little lighter inside here. This is slightly darker. And then we also have the balance point shadow right about here. The balance point shadow is the darkest shadow right at the base of the object, remember? And the balance point shadow cuts up here, and then it folds up this way. So there would actually be a second cast shadow, but because of the light and where the light is, you can't exactly see it. There's a slight darkness right about here along the edge, but you can see this balance point shadow. Now the balance point shadows typically will come from about the bottom of the object, just about where it touches. So now we have a pretty good sketch of the cast shadow. The next step is to sketch out the values you see in the object. And I'm going to start with the darkest one that's most clear to me. There's a really dark value right about here. Now in the ball I see a few layers of other dark values. There is a darker shadow that comes from about here down to the bottom of the object, bottom of the ball, curves like that. And then I see a really small highlight area right about here. And this I would say highlight, middle value here, shadow on the object. This is the darkest shadow. And here it's just a little bit lighter, and this is what we call reflected light. So the light bouncing off the highlight and coming around the highlight hits the paper surface and bounces back within the shadow region to make that a little lighter. And this is what allows us to see the separation between the shadow region on the ball and the cast shadow. So here is the sketch of our image. We're just about ready to shade. So this is part one, drawing your sketch of your object and outlining the values or value mapping.